there are dimensions of that phenomena that you do not fully understand simply by observing. And yet, it is important for you to have some understanding of that. So you struggle to understand something you don't, and you know no matter how you struggle to do it, there's always a dimension you'll never be able to learn. So a real scientist is a very modest person, not arrogant at all. The second one is that there's always uncertainty in terms of your study. And you cannot say you have full understanding of it. You know, there are two very different models. One is Bertrand Russell, the great philosopher. Is that rationality is like to see things at noon. The sun is bright, the things are being exposed, so you can see things clearly if you have rationality. The other one is Whitehead. Whitehead, we always see things in a foggy weather, and we struggle, we try to probe, but we are aware that they are things that we cannot see, and we have to be aware of that problem. And yet, all scientists believe there are patterns. In other words, there's some kind of order pattern that we as scientists would be able to discover. And we cannot discover all these patterns clearly, and yet they are patterns. So one question relates to Yangming's idea is whether these patterns are just out there, or these patterns represent the possibility of certain kind of interaction between the patterns we have. In other words, how do we know this? And we know it, and of course, why we study this rather than that? Why there's a history that we focus on this dimension, and why discovery is based upon a certain kind of trajectory. And this the imagined possibility of an interaction between the scientist as an active participant in understanding what's going on. And we're delighted that the more we study, the more we're able to do things well. You know, if you look at what we've been able to do, just from the steam engine all the way to our ability to go to the moon and even beyond, and our ability to develop all these incredible technologies. But there's a gap between technology and basic science. We'll be able to do a lot, and yet why it is that we can do often escapes us. Now we can do a lot about even cloning, but don't confuse cloning as our understanding what actually happened. So most of the people who are able to do cloning turn out to be not really basic scientists. They can do it, but they don't know how, what are the reasons. And a simple example is the example that we all experience, like the experience of pain. And of course now there are many ways to deal with pain. Aspirin is one possibility, even the acupuncture. And so pain can be relieved. And we still have very vague idea how pain occurs. It is basically, it is chemical, it is physiological, it is mental, it may relate it to the brain, and also it is experiential. If someone says, I'm in pain, and you use all kinds of quantitative methods you cannot find, but you have to accept it as something that you have to deal with. So the cognitive participation is related to your experiential understanding. And even with all these incredible instruments, we still do not know where, how, and in what process pain occurs. But anyway, to understand, to know, is something which is much more complicated than the old 19th century, early 20th century notion about something out there which is stable, which never changes, and we try to study it, and eventually we'll be able to know what's going on. And so the inductive model is quite important. Now, this is not to say Wyoming is right, but it's to say that Wyoming has a very interesting idea about how you know. And this relates to three domains in terms of modern academic thinking, and they are, normally they are clearly separate. But in this mode of thinking, the Confucian tradition, they're not. Now, the three domains refer to aesthetics, ethics, and religion. Now, aesthetics is always related to feeling, and often people say intuitive feeling. And ethics is always rule-governed, and religion is in a way mysterious. And that's why many people say you have to experience something called a leap of faith. Religion has something to do with faith. Faith is never rational in the simple sense of the term. You cannot be involved in ethics and not follow rules and regulations. And of course, it's not possible if you don't have feeling that you'll be able to have the experience of aesthetic appreciation of the world. Now, ever since mentions, we know that morality is based upon feeling. And feeling is specific. Commiseration, for example, sympathy, and the feeling of right and wrong. Right and wrong is not simply a cognitive differentiation. Right and wrong also involves feelings. And at the same time, moral thinking or moral activity is based upon feeling. Different kind of feeling. You have to be able to differentiate these feelings from ordinary feelings like anger, joy, pleasure, a sense of pleasure. And yet, if ethics is not extended, this notion about extending from the self to the family and so forth, if ethics is not extended, it never completes. So ethics has to be extended to a realm, I call it heaven, which may be understood in a comparative civilizational perspective, a religious idea. So ethics is rooted in feelings on the one hand, and must be extended to what we call the spiritual realm, or the spiritual realm of religion. And so we have